We are about halfway through now. Is that right? By the end of tonight, we'll be halfway through because we're covering 2 lessons tonight since we didn't have one a couple weeks ago with VBS. So tonight we're going to talk about the facts that happiness does not come by power and it does not come by fame. So the first one is not by the exercises of power. Brother Phil Sanders wrote this article. Phil is the host of Search, In Search of the Lord's Way. It's on national television every Sunday morning. And he does a good work with that program. He begins by talking about how the way of the world includes the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. And some try to fill their sinful pleasures with the flesh, some with the eyes, but the focus for tonight, or at least part of tonight, is going to be the pride that comes from the exercise of power over other people. It's arrogant pride. It's things that you think you're better than everybody else. You think you have all the answers. You're not even going to listen to somebody else's opinion. And that leads to these works of the flesh that Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21. Hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, and dissensions. These things are divisive. They cause problems in the church, don't they? Sometimes. And they can cause problems in the workplace for sure. But, you know, we're dealing with spiritual matters here, and this can be a major problem in the church.
Cause trouble in the home.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can cause trouble in the home. You know, we have to always keep in mind who is the head, who is in charge. It's Jesus. It's God. There is no authority that the husband has over the wife that he can usurp from God. The authority that he has, he gets from God. As soon as he begins to go astray from God's plan, there's problems there. The eldership, they only have the authority that God gives them in the Scriptures. When they start to allow things to be preached that are not sound, when they begin to allow practices to be practiced in the church, they've lost the authority to say that they can do that. Because as soon as you say you can do something that God says you can't do, or that you can't do something that God says you can do, you got problems. Anytime we disagree with God, we have problems. The pride was a big part of the problem of the Scribes and the Pharisees. Go over to Matthew chapter 23 and look at some of the things that are recorded there in the gospel that we should take note of today. Because even though we don't have scribes and Pharisees in the traditional sense, we can still display some of these attitudes in the way that we deal with our brothers and sisters in Christ. So in verses 6 and 7, Jesus, speaking of the scribes and Pharisees, he says, they love the best places at feasts, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. That was a term of honor to be considered a teacher in the first century religious world, the Jewish world. They always wanted the very best for themselves. They didn't want to give that honor up to anyone else, did they? We have to be careful that we don't display these types of attitudes, that we don't have these attitudes in our hearts. They thought that their place was to lay heavy burdens on others, to control others' lives, They believed that they were endowed with greater ability and permit for themselves opportunities and privileges that they denied others. Do what I say, not what I do. Right? Look at how I talk, not how I walk. You can't do the same things I do, but you better do the things I tell you to do. That's not a good attitude to have. We have to, Brother Sanders says, they show little hesitance to step on others to achieve greater heights. In the church, what are we supposed to be doing?
We're supposed to be in submission to each other.
In submission to each other. We're supposed to be building each other up, right? We don't use each other as stepping stones. Our number one goal, get to heaven. Number two,
Take people with you.
take as many with us as we can. We can't do that if we're stepping on people. If we're pushing them to the side. If we're saying, no, you can't do that, I can do that, but you can't do that. That's wrong, okay? We have to work within the confines of what God has revealed and do what He tells us to do. Selfish pride leads people to think that they must have their own way and do whatever it takes to get it. King Ahab wanted the fields of Naboth, the vineyard. Naboth would not sell. So Jezebel sent letters in Ahab's name, plotted against Naboth, claiming Naboth had cursed God and the king, and they stoned him. Ahab seized the vineyard, and they used their power to lie, to condemn an innocent man. We've got to be truthful in our interactions. When we start lying about other people to bring them down to advance ourselves, we got problems. Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 3, we talked about it a few weeks ago in VBS, right? He set up the golden image, and he wanted everyone to go and fall down and worship that golden image. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said no. Nebuchadnezzar became full of fury, ordered his servants to heat the furnace up 7 times more than it was usually heated, and throw those 3 troublemakers into that furnace. They survived, didn't they? Nebuchadnezzar's servants didn't survive. They were burned up. But the 3 Jews, the 3 Israelites, the 3 Hebrews, they survived. But Nebuchadnezzar showed a prideful, arrogant attitude in that whole scenario. Haman, the Agagite. This is from Esther 3. I think that's misspelled. There should be an H in there too. Esther. I didn't proofread it before I closed the file. So. Haman, the Agagite, he wanted the honor. He was not the king. He was a servant of the king. He didn't serve the king very well, though, did he? But he wanted honor for himself. He wanted to be recognized. Mordecai, the Jew, refused to fall down and pay homage to Haman. Haman was then filled with wrath. He decided to annihilate all the Jews, not just Mordecai, but to eradicate the entire race in one day. His pride backfired. He ended up being what? Hanged. He created this what's the word? Gallows. Thank you. He created these gallows to hang Mordecai, and he ended up being the one hanged. So, pride leads to some very dangerous situations. We need to watch our attitude. So Brother Sanders then turns his attention to the truly blessed. If pride is not the way to do it, what is? What's the opposite of pride? Humility, right? Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." The person who is humble, poor in spirit, meek, they know how desperately they need the Lord. They're not so full of themselves that they have no room for God in their lives. The meek, the gentle person may indeed be powerful. I know a man who's a very successful business person. He's a very humble person too. He doesn't go around bragging about it. But he's not so full of himself that he doesn't give God his due and the credit that God is due.
You've probably heard this explanation of meek is compared to like a horse. It's power under strength.
Yeah, power under strength.
It's strength under control. That's
Yeah,
what I'm trying to say.
okay. Strength under control.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have some self-restraint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a strong person, but you know how to control yourself.
Absolutely. That's right.
It's not that you're just a wimp, and meek doesn't mean wimpy.
Right. Yeah. Meek does not mean weak.
Mm-hmm.
Meek does not mean that you're a doormat. But it is strength under control or power under control. Jesus talks about humility. Luke chapter 14, verse 11. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. He who humbles himself will be exalted. But you know what? Even the apostles who spent years with Jesus, they were with him for 3 years, 3.5 years, they struggled with this concept, didn't they? John and James, their mother comes to Jesus. Hey, put one of my kids on your right hand, put the other on your left when you come in your glory, when you come in your kingdom. That's a prideful attitude. That's a, hey, give me something attitude. And Jesus turns that around and he says, look, power and prestige and those things that are in the kingdom is a lot different than what the world sees. The quote here in Matthew chapter 20, verses 24 through 28. When the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus wanted his apostles and his servants in the church, his disciples, to be servants, rather than to lord it over others, like the Gentile kingdoms did. If you're a ruler, if you're the boss, everybody's got to pay attention to you all the time. And that's not how it is in the church. Even with the church, in the church, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we see that the spiritually gifted struggled with this concept too. 1 Corinthians 12, Paul's talking about the body and how it's many members, but it's one body. And look at verses 21 through 26, 1 Corinthians 12. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. No, much rather, those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on these we bestow greater honor. And our unpresentable parts have greater modesty. But our presentable parts have no need. But God composed the body, having given greater honor to that part which lacks it, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care for one another. And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is honored, all members rejoice with it. And if we continue reading the rest of that chapter, you are the body of Christ, members individually. And God has appointed these in the church, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers. After that, miracles and gifts of healings, helps, administrations, varieties of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracles? Do all have the same gifts of healings? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But earnestly desire the best gifts, and yet I show you a more excellent way. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body be burned and have not love, it profits me nothing. These guys were basically challenging one another. Look at how great I am. But that's not what it's about. It's about love. It's the motivation is what we're getting down to. And if your motivation for speaking in tongues or prophesying or whatever it may be back in the first century, if your motivation was for the prestige, the honor, the praise of men, motivation was wrong. There was a more excellent way, Paul says, and that way is the way of love. All right? Selfish ambition will keep one from heaven. That hits hard sometimes. We need to realize that having the wrong motivation, if we're doing things for ourselves, if we're doing things to receive the praise of men like the Pharisees often did, we've got a problem and we need to address it. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be arrogant, so lie against the truth. The wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. And it leads, eventually, James 3:14 through 16, that earthly wisdom leads to confusion, leads to every evil thing. We need to be careful that we have our mind set in the right place. There was a man that John wrote about in his third epistle, Diotrephes. He loved to have the preeminence. If that's what you love, you might get it, but that's all you're going to get. That's your reward. If you want to be a leader in the church, because God tells us that we should desire, right? We should desire to be a leader. 1 Timothy chapter, is it chapter 2 or 3? I think it's 3. It says, if any man desires to be a bishop, desires the work of the bishop, he desires a good work. You've got to remember, it is a work. It's not just a title. And I think that's what Diotrephes was getting caught up in. He just wanted the title of being the guy, being the decision maker. John said, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. It's pride, it's the demand to be first. That's what preeminence means. Diotrephes, he mistreated the servants of God who didn't deserve the treatment they received. He spoke against them. He even spoke against the Apostle John. His unwillingness to receive brethren meant that he was also unwilling to receive Christ. His arrogant act of putting faithful brethren out of the church revealed the extent to which he thought he had power. Can any man put someone else out of the church? No. We can withdraw fellowship when it's necessary.
That shouldn't be one man's
It's not one man, and it's not even after one admonition, right? You know, we have to follow what Jesus said in Matthew 18. It's not just a, hey, you sin, get out. It's you approach that brother in love, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1, with meekness, with gentleness, realizing that you yourself can be tempted. Perhaps it's that we can be tempted to be like Diotrephes. That we can develop that pride and say, hey, I'm good enough to make these decisions on my own. But we're not. Okay? How do we treat others? Well, we've got to have a humble attitude. We've got to be lowly. In Ephesians chapter 4, he was talking about walking worthy of the walk wherewith we are called in all lowliness. And that's got to be a part of it. We've got to be humble toward one another. I know I'm going a little quick, but we've got a lot to cover. We've got to have the humility of Christ. Paul talks about this in Philippians chapter 2. Verse 5, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And then he goes on to talk about the humility, how he became, even though he was equal to God, he became a man. He became a bondservant. He was willing to submit to the authority of God, to the authority of the Father. He was willing to even suffer death on the cross. Leaders need to be very cautious when it comes to pride. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6, novices are excluded from potential eldership or potential positions of leadership. Why?
Because they're not mature yet.
They're not mature. And what would that lead to?
That can lead to pride.
It can lead to pride.
Say, look at me.
Exactly. So the elders, men need to be aware of this. The church needs to be aware of this so that when men are being considered for the eldership, we need to look at their attitude. We need to look at their motivation. But we need to ask the questions of those who want to serve to make sure that they are not doing so out of pride. A number of passages from the Proverbs are referenced in this section. Brother Sanders says, arrogance and pride may for a time allow some control, but it will end in defeat. God hates the evil of pride and arrogance. Proverbs 8:13 deals with that. Dishonor follows pride. It's a consequence of pride. You can see that in Proverbs 11:2 and 29:23. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. Proverbs 16:18 and 19. If you're offered a position of power by corrupt people, it's better to turn it down and stay humble, because you're going to get the reward that they get in the end. Elders must not be self-willed. My way or the highway, right? Titus chapter 1 verse 7 talks about this. It's stubbornness. It's arrogance. It's folks who despise authority. They want the positions of authority because they don't want to submit to anybody else. They regard themselves as the authority, self-important. Some elders forget that they are subject to the eldership as a whole, as individual elders. They have to submit to the other elders. Those who act on their own authority, they cause problems for the eldership. When one elder assumes too much authority, it's necessary for the other elders to deal with that situation and to bring him back into line with God's will. If they tolerate his presumptuous acts, then they share in his disobedience. Peter, when Jesus was raised from the dead, and he met the apostles on the beach, He talks to Peter. He says, Peter, do you love me? You know I love you. He says, feed my lambs. 3 times he said, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. And then Peter, later on, when he wrote his epistle to the church, and he addressed a part of that to the elders of the church. And he said, shepherd the flock of God, which is among you. He understood what Jesus was saying to him. You lead with gentleness. You lead with tenderness. And so he was encouraging other elders to do this as well. Brother Sanders ends saying, godly elders see themselves not as lords over the flock, but as servants and shepherds to care for, guard, and protect the flock over which God has given them charge. Comments or questions on this portion of the lesson?
I just was thinking, we're talking about elders here, but when you look at the qualifications for the elders, the only difference for the elders and the ordinary Christian is the marriage,
right? The family,
marital status, and we should all aspire to that same level.
Yeah, when we look at the moral qualifications, all Christians should meet those qualifications.
Right.
But you're right, the marital status, the children. Right. That's right. Yeah. Okay, anything else? All right, let's turn the page over to the next article, Brother Hampton. Not by worldly fame. Not by worldly fame. The pursuit of fame. There are warnings in the New Testament against this. Jesus talks about it in Matthew chapter 6, and I never really put it in this context when I've studied this before. But there he's talking about doing your charitable deeds, making your prayers, fasting, and doing it so that you receive the acclaim of men. Worldly fame does not necessarily bring with it wealth. Okay? These men who were doing these things in Matthew 6, they weren't doing it for monetary gain. They just wanted to be popular because they were pious in men's eyes. And that's not the right motivation for serving God.
They wanted the attention.
Right. Yeah, they wanted the attention.
And we have that sometimes in the church. Certain people want the attention focused on them all the time.
Right.
It's all about me.
Yep.
And we got to work against that.
Yes. Yeah, we have to, we've got to watch it individually. We need to watch ourselves to make sure that we don't fall into this same mindset that those Pharisees did. I love this quote from McGarvey. There at the bottom of page 20 going up to page 21. Trumpets were sounded as signals to large bodies. The hypocrites of that day did not blow a literal trumpet to call attention to their gifts, but they used methods to call attention to their generosity. You know, I use this example, and I'm not going to say who it was, but there was a man who, he's passed away now. He was very famous. A very famous singer. I mean, his videos were on MTV all the time, and he led a simple lifestyle, but he went to the hospitals and visited fans. He refused to allow photographers to take any pictures. He asked those fans, please don't tell anybody I came. He was not doing it for the fame. Now, he was famous for other reasons, but he did not do the good things in order to receive the acclaim of men. He had the proper motivation, even though his lifestyle was not such that God approved of. So we need to really watch our motivations. If somebody in the world can even see the distinction between those things, but we need to be very careful to make sure that we do as well. The age of social media, I don't know if you've seen the meme of the guy who's giving a grocery bag to a homeless guy, and he's got the camera up here taking a selfie. That's Matthew 6. You're doing it for the attention. When you do something good for somebody, you don't have to post it on Facebook. You don't have to put it out on Twitter or Instagram or whatever other social media outlets you use. Nobody has to know, except for you, the person you did it for, and God. And you're going to get the reward from God. Now, if somebody else says something about it, that's different. Luke, when he wrote the book of Acts, he talked about Barnabas and the gifts that he did. He sold everything he had. He took the money. He laid it at the apostles' feet. Barnabas didn't ask him to write that. Barnabas wasn't doing it for that reason. He was doing it because he saw a need and he wanted to meet that need. And then you turn over the page in Acts chapter 5 and you see in Ananias and Sapphira, they saw what Barnabas was doing. Ooh, you know what? We can get some good credit doing this too. We can get some people looking at us. And so, there's a definite thing about motivation there that we need to watch. The Scribes and Pharisees, again in Matthew chapter 23, we've already read part of this. All their works they do to be seen by men. They wanted other people to say, that's a religious person. That's a holy person. Now, they had a different concept of holiness, didn't they? Or at least maybe they were outwardly righteous, but it was inwardly they were not. He talks in Mark chapter, where am I at here? Mark 12:38. Okay, down a little bit more. He's talking about the showy acts, the wearing the long robes, taking the best seats at the banquets. We read that. That was Matthew 23 as well. Their favorite position in the synagogue on the Sabbath was in the semicircular row of seats, which were back of the lectern or desk of the reader and faced the congregation. You got to be up front, facing the congregation, so they can see that you're there, right? The scribes wanted the acclaim of men. The further evidence of that was in their long prayers. Jesus prayed all night. It wasn't the